Everyone. I'm Andrew Dolan, the Executive Director at Solus Nua. Thank you all for being here tonight. I have a few thanks to get out. First, thank you to NYU and to our board member, Tom McIntyre, for hosting us here in this beautiful, beautiful space. And my sincerest thanks to Patty Meskel, who's been a driving force from this event. And the food donated by Silver Dollar, so thank you for that. Yes. So it's wild to think that this weekend Solus Nua is a partner on 4 different events. Last night we hosted a screening with AFI to show Flora and Son. Tonight we have this poetry reading. Tomorrow we have the closing day of Neve McCann's Someone Decides Hawk or Dove, a spectacular visual arts show. And at the same time, running at Woolly Mammoth is an audio headphone piece, 20 minutes long, free. It's a beautiful piece by the Dublin collective Murmuration called One Moment Now. And then on Monday, we're partnering with the Northern Ireland Bureau to show a film. Talk to Eamon up there afterwards if you want to know more. And then we take one day off and then we hop on an airplane to head to the Dublin Theatre Festival, where we will be premiering a new commission in partnership with the Abbey Theatre. That is called Distillation by Luke Casserly, and we're going to bring it to here in DC in 2024. Oh. That's 1 week of Solus Nua bouncing around. It is now my great pleasure to introduce Patty Meskel, Chair Emeritus of Solus Nua.
So Andy took the job in March. You can tell he's been slacking off terribly in May, and he's been slacking off, you know. Thank you, Andrew, and congratulations. And Dia Yiv, Golair, Cordia Yilish, Agrina Ushla, August, Alon, Falcherov, Higon, Okad, fierce Bishi of the show. And to the people here and also to the people online, we can feel your warm presence here in the auditorium with us. So thank you all for joining. Some hundreds have signed off online, and you're as much as here as if you're not. Like God, you're everywhere. Isn't that what they say? But anyway, we are here to officially celebrate the US launch of Jane Clarke's most recent book, A Change in the Air. And there is no one that I can think of more suitable to introduce and lead the conversation for us than esteemed critic Ron Charles of the Washington Post. A few things to say. When someone like the novelist Sebastian Barry says that Ireland is in a golden age of literature, we should sit up and take notice. Indeed, you could say that across the arts, the Irish artistic expression is having a golden age. And I would say that it is particularly exciting at this stage for Solus Nua to be involved in presenting contemporary Irish art. Ireland is changing rapidly and dramatically, and mostly for the better. The voices that had been stilled for many times, women, the LGBT community, travelers, and the new Irish, the immigrants who are coming to our shores and infusing our society and our culture with new vitality and energy and perspectives, and they are having a huge positive impact on our society and transforming Irish arts. We are absolutely in their debt. And Jane Clarke is one of the most evocative and one of the most prominent of these new voices. I would say that, you know, poetry, to be Irish is to kind of be a poet, particularly after a few pints, but even before a few pints, poetry is in our soul. And probably per capita, Ireland has more poets than any other country in the world. And there's a story that I love, and I don't really care if it's true or not. And the story is that in a small little village called Lyra Compan, in the uplands of North Kerry, there's a group of old men. In each April, they go out to the bog to cut the turf for the winter. And as they cut the turf, They sculpt and they hone and they practice expressions and sentences that describe their lives or the affairs of the world. And later that evening, in the pub, they impress their friends and neighbors by spontaneously, nonchalantly using these sculpted and crafted phrases to describe it. And it's a kind of a contest. Irish people have a love for fluency and capacity with words, and I think that's one of the reasons we have great poets. From the Iron Age to the mid 16th century, Gaelic Irish society and culture flourished. The two most powerful classes of people in that society were the chieftains and the poets. The chieftains' power derived from their land, their armies, and the authorities they got from the Brehon laws. The poets' power derived from their capacity to use words. And they used their poems and they composed their poems to connect the people to their past, to their memories, to their ancestors, to their lands. They used their poetry to confront injustice and challenge readers' wrongdoing. And they used their poetry to connect us to nature and the natural world and to help people understand the interdependence between nature and the natural world. Jane Clarke continues that tradition of Irish poets, but anew and with fresh relevance and fresh resonance, her poetry challenges us and gives us the opportunities to experience and understand the world anew. And to have Jane here is a thrill. And I get out my notes here to make sure I don't miss anything. Jane has published 3 full collections and a small, what you call it, booklet, Jane, I suppose, a pamphlet called All the Way Home. She has been writing poetry since she was 44, and Jane's new book, A Change in the Air, has been highly praised and has been nominated for several prizes. Ron, I mean, do I really need to say anything about Ron? But I will, just to make him like blush. He's the editor, the literary critic, the feature writer, and an English professor, and has been with the Washington Post since 2005, the same year that Solas Nua was founded. No coincidence. Ron has wide experience with publishing and writing about publishing and literature and culture. And lads, if you haven't signed on to Ron's book club newsletter, you have to do it. It's brilliant, a gem of what it is, and it's widely read and appreciated. The last time Ron and Jane chatted was in 2019 in the Quaker House up there on 20th Street. It was to celebrate the launch of Jane's book, When the Tree Falls. So it is now entirely appropriate that on the US launch of Jane's new book, A Change in the Air, Ron and Jane get to continue their conversation. So friends and lads, I'd ask you to give a warm Solas Nua Irish welcome to Jane Clarke and Ron Charles.
He didn't really use the notes that much. Did you notice? Wow. Thank you very much. It's just a delight to be here. I'm so glad to be here with you again.
Thank you, Ron.
Congratulations. It's another beautiful collection. I'm not even going to pretend not to use my notes. Your first collection, published just 8 years ago in 2015. I want to start by asking you, how different is it to be a poet who's sending a collection out into the world where you have no idea how it will be received? Where now you have an audience, you have people who love you out there, people who are eager to read you. How does that change the way you think about your book, the way you even compose a book?
Well, Terry was just asking me about this before. What's it like doing the third book? And I do think I'm more confident. It definitely it does make a difference knowing you have an audience. It does make a difference knowing people are interested in what you're doing. And it's that kind of it's a very different book to the other two, but it's also a continuation that's what's very interesting, you know, that it's like you're continuing to look at some themes, but it's also very different, and I love that about it. I love the difference as well.
And it has been well received. It's been shortlisted for the Forward Prize. That puts you in a room with people like Ted Hughes, Carol Ann Duffy, Seamus Haney, people you may have heard of. A Change in the Air, I think, is safe to say your most wide-ranging collection, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
It's intensely intimate, but it covers a lot of ground.
Yes, yeah. One of the things is that I had a number of commissions for this book, and that made a difference because, in a way, I was asked to do work that I mightn't have done otherwise. So I was pushed into areas that and actually that was very good for my practice. I couldn't have done that 8 years ago. I wouldn't have had the confidence, wouldn't have had the skills to do that 8 years ago. You know, the first book was very intensely personal. You know, but this is slightly different. There's very personal, as you say, but then there are, you know, areas like the poems about the border that brought me away from my personal experience, and I love doing that. It's
wonderful. It's wonderful. Firstly, I'd like to start with the third section.
Okay.
All the Way Home. It's about World War I. You may have already answered this, but I want a fuller answer. What drew you back to this period and these soldiers in World War I?
Well, I was asked to write about it, but I was writing those poems around the centenary of World War I. So there was so much in the media, there were books being brought out. We were steeped in it at the time, and that did really help. It was very alive to me. And of course, the World War I poets were very influential.
That's what I was thinking, and we were starting to read them again if we'd forgotten them.
Yeah, that's right. And they were, when I was starting to write, they were very influential because there's that kind of intensity, raw intensity of that work that I found very moving. But yeah, no, I was asked to write these. It was a commission again, and I was very pleased with the work eventually, but I worked very hard to get to make them,
sure.
You know.
There's a poem called, by the way, can you all hear us okay? Okay. There's a poem called In the Dugout. It's a poem about soldiers just passing the time, playing a game they call When All This Is Over.
Yeah.
I wonder if you'd read that for us.
Yes, I'd love to. In the dugout. To pass the time in the dugout, they play the When All This Is Over game. In the beginning, their plans were bold, one chap keen to outdo the next. Now it's a drink in the local, Sunday dinner with all the trimmings, to walk in the Malverns, waltz with my wife in the kitchen, hold my mother's hand, watch my children sleep. Wishes distilled to the final drop, like scotch in a copper still.
What these men are doing strikes me as a kind of poetic act, distilling memory and experiences into language that makes it present for them again.
Yeah.
Is that what appealed to you?
Yeah, and I suppose I was thinking they were there so long together in the dugout. Like some of them were there years and years in these trenches. And you could think, and I was imagining their camaraderie. And you see, these poems came from letters. They were evoked by letters between a soldier in the First World War and his sister at home in England.
That had survived.
That had survived. So I had the letters and I had the photographs. So they were what, so he talked a lot about the others that he was with. And so I just imagined what they would do to pass the time.
It was mostly boring unless it was terrifying.
Yes, yeah. I mean, they even planted gardens. They were there that long.
Unbelievable.
I mean, it is unbelievable.
Were you able to lift whole lines from the letters?
No, not whole lines, but more the mood or the sense of it. It was more, I didn't, I didn't get any found poems in the letters. But I did there was one found poem from the testimony of an Irish priest, in the First World War. So that was a found poem.
Right.
But the others, it was more an imaginative act, but inspired by things he wrote in the letters.
It strikes me as so tragic that in the future we will not have any letters because they will all have vanished in chats and texts and emails. And
Yeah, it is because
there'll be this blank period in history.
yeah, when you think about finding out about so many people, particularly writers, it's their letters we go to. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
There's another poem taken from this poem called "When All This Is Over."
Yes.
I wonder if you'd read that on page 38.
Yes. Okay. When all this is over, we'll follow a path through silver birch and pine. Listen for the shepherd whistling to her flock of pregnant ewes. Look for grasses, herbs trampled under their hooves. Catch the scent of crushed chamomile, lavender, thyme. From the mossy mountainside, drink the river's source.
There are poems so good that they're like instructions on how to write a poem. A poem like that just brings the senses alive. So it's a great poem, but it also seems to me an essential act for those soldiers who are in holes, right? They're in long, muddy, colorless trenches. So of course, what they need are smells and colors and sounds.
That's right. And it's funny, this one I read quite a bit during lockdown, because if you remember in the beginning, we kept saying, that's what we said to each other, when all this is over.
Right.
We kept saying that. And that is what I imagine those men saying, because that's the only way you keep hope alive, is you have to try and imagine a future that would be different.
Right.
That's part of your survival, isn't it? And that's what we all did during lockdown. Remember all the things we promised we'd do when we could get out again,
right.
and when we could connect with people, and there's always a fear that won't happen. You're living with both. You've got the hope, but you've got this fear that maybe it won't be over.
Right.
And that makes, I think, the emotion of it all the more intense.
Soldier whose letters you had, what happened to him?
He died. He signed up, he joined up on the 1st of September 1914. He died on the 1st of September 1918.
That was almost the end.
That was the end, just before the end of the war. That's when he died.
It's unspeakably tragic.
Yeah, unspeakable. And
also that they served so long.
Yes. He actually suffered and had to come home in between times for a few months, and then would be sent back out again. Yeah.
I think I read in your book that 40,000 Irishmen died in the war. That's an enormous percentage of the country.
Yeah, enormous. And you see, that was kind of not known for years. We were very uncomfortable with the fact that so many Irish people fought for the British Army, you see. So that wasn't part of the new republic's history. So that was part of the reclaiming of history that went on in the centenary. It was a really important part, because these men, they came back, some of them came back to Ireland, and they were treated dreadfully, because it was shameful, because 1916 happened during the First World War. So we had our republic, but the men who had fought for the British Army were not acceptable anymore.
Wow.
And most of them had just gone to get a job. It wasn't really about loyalty to the British. It was a job for many of them because of poverty.
You have a poem called Ling, a word I don't know. Maybe you could explain the title before you read it?
Yeah, Ling is heather. It's a type of heather, and you'll see it all over the mountains in Ireland and in Scotland.
It's on page 37. Yeah. This is a poem about memory and place and persistence.
Ling. A sprig of heather falling from his sister's letter carries him home to the slopes of Slieve Donard. A sea of honey-scented ling, purple flowers teeming with bees. A shepherd told him at the time of creation, no plant would cover the bare mountain slopes. Only heather, out of kindness, offered its modest growth. A brave little plant, he called it. No matter how trampled by rutting stags, the woolly branches always spring back.
That seems to me a particularly fraught symbol of hope in a poem that we know doesn't end hopefully.
Yes.
How did you think about How do you think about symbols in general, and how did you think about the symbol developing in that poem?
Well, just to say, you asked were there any lines taken from the letters. This actually was in one of her last letters to her brother. She sent him a sprig of heather.
How do you know that?
Because he thanks her for the sprig of heather.
Oh, okay.
There's a letter where he thanks her for the sprig of heather. And very soon after that, he died. It might have been his last letter to her where he thanked her. So that was, that evoked this poem very powerfully.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about that is the quality of heather, that it does spring back, But yes, this man didn't. Yeah.
The country does.
Yes.
Culture does.
Yes.
So it's a very
a
very tragic symbol of hope.
Yes. Yeah.
The fourth section of this collection moves to a more recent and internal conflict in Ireland. You have a poem here called Flight that is strikingly violent and dramatic in a way that I have not seen much in your work.
Yeah.
And did you think of it as a departure or as as some sort of artistic expansion of your work?
Well, I didn't actually think about that. I mean, it's interesting to see it like that. I mean, this comes from a story my mother used to tell about her memory as a child.
She was in this?
She was in that.
Wait till you hear it.
Yeah, she was in it.
Well, maybe you should read it, and
okay,
then they'll know what we're talking about.
Read it.
Because you're all reading along, aren't you? They're anticipating us. This poem is called Flight.
Flight. Shove over the bolt, douse the lamps, lie down on the kitchen floor. Her quiet father shouted when he saw 5 men march through the farmyard to the door. He knew them from the fairs. They'd chat about the weather, the price of weanlings and heifers. Let them not set the house alight, her mother wept. They don't want to harm us, only to warn us. Her father shushed as bullets split the shutters, splintered mirrors lodged in whitewashed walls. They lay on the flagstones till dawn, curled into each other, a smidgen of warmth from the stove. Next day, neighbours helped them empty the house and load 2 carts, clothes thrown into baskets, mattresses, blankets, rugs, cups and saucers wrapped in tea towels, a can of milk, gifts of cabbage and soda bread. Sure, you'll be back, they said, when these troubles are settled. Her father checked the harness, lifted her up between her sisters, and tucked them in with a blanket, the family Bible at their feet.
That is very cinematic.
Yeah.
Very dramatic. And to find out that your mother survived that.
Yeah, and I mean, I adapted the end of it a bit because you see, there were 2 inspirations. One is my mother's experience because, this was during when land was very, politicized in Ireland for good reason. But basically, neighbours wanted my grandfather out, and so they did warn him. Okay, by those bullets. And so, and my
a warning.
Yeah, I know. And so, I mean, I changed it a little because my mother was she was the eldest in the family. There were no sisters at that time. So I did take a bit of dramatic license with it, poetic license. But they moved to another place. But my mother remembers that house so well. Even though she was about 3 or 4 when she would have moved from it. But sorry, just to say the second inspiration was because I was asked to write poems about the border, and I talked to women on both sides of the border. I asked them their stories, and one of them told a story about her family moving from one side of the border to the other in these circumstances, because that happened a lot. At the, Protestants moved north and Catholics moved south because it was so dangerous. And I mean, that kind of thing, it continued up till very recently. So I had tried to write the poem from my mother's perspective for years, and I just couldn't get it. And then I heard these stories from the women, and then I read a Natasha Treadaway poem.
Which one?
It's a poem where it's about a cross being put in their lawn and it's burning. And it starts, I think it might be a villanelle. I should have looked it up. I don't know if Terry, if you would know it, which one it is.
I do know it. I'm trying to remember the title.
Yeah. It's beautifully done. And what it was, it starts with they tell the story every year.
Oh.
And it was the poem helped me write this poem, but it was because of that thing of telling a story every year, because that's what my mother would do as well. Right. You know, the way there are these fundamental stories in families that have to that have to be told again and again. Right. It's part of kind of working it out, I think.
Right, as opposed to re-traumatizing, it's getting control of it in some way.
Yeah. So all of those things went into making this poem.
And I want to hear more about talking to the women, these women on both sides, you said.
Yeah, from both communities.
And they spoke to you because?
Yeah, well, I was asked to write some poems about the border. Again, it was 2021, which was the centenary of the creation of the border, which was 1921. So we had this decade of centenaries in Ireland where all those very important dates, like, you know, 1916, 1920, and we're just at the completion of it, 2023. Right. But so I was asked to write some poems, and one of them would be set to music. So I thought, and I was, you know, it was suggested that I would talk to some people who had experience of the border. So I, you know, contacted a community group between Leitrim and Fermanagh. They're two counties on either side of the border. And I got to speak to these women, this women's group. And the question I asked was, what has the border meant to you? That was all I asked.
Right.
And I could have asked them, what was your life story?
Right. But you just asked that open-ended question.
But that led to life stories in a way.
Were they filled with rage and resentment, or had they moved on?
I couldn't say they had moved on because Brexit was happening at the time, and that had stirred all the pain up again. Yeah. So it was actually very close to them. I mean, at the end of one of the discussions, one woman said, "It's a wound in our landscape." Yeah. And that actually influenced the poems very much because they were saying it's something, it's not a political agreement, just. Right. Or not our disagreement. It's something real that's dividing our landscape and dividing. Like one woman was saying, I can see my grandmother's grave on the other side of the border. From where she sat in her house, she could see it. You know, so talking to them was really important for me. But I think talking about it with each other, they said they spoke about it in a way they hadn't before.
Oh. But just the process of being asked by a poet, someone outside of their group.
Outside, yeah.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
Did you hear from them after you published the poems?
Yeah, well, I actually sent them all a copy of the book, and I got some feedback. I mean, a number of people liked there's a very long poem about the border, and a number of people said that one was the one they preferred, you know? Yeah.
Nice. It's no accident that the last word is Bible.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
I'll say more about that.
Yes.
Why did you end there with that word?
Well, I suppose, isn't that it? Well, I suppose one thing is that the Bible would have been very important to families on both sides of the border.
Right, so it's historically accurate.
Historically, and when you're moving home, what would you want to bring with you? You would want to bring the family Bible. Right. But also because of what the Bible has meant to the level of division. Right. Which, I mean, it isn't just about religion, of course. It's about colonialism, right. You know, but religion is part of it. So I suppose I just felt that kind of that image was powerful at the end.
It's very powerful. Yeah. The tragic irony that this country will be split over a religion about love and forgiveness is ongoing. Yeah. And this was during the pandemic you were conducting some of these interviews?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So these people had been isolated for a while.
Yes. And some of it was done on Zoom. I know it's hard to believe, but we got really good discussions. So women were in their different houses, but it was, and maybe the fact that people were a little bit distant and it was in the pandemic, that people wanted to talk.
Oh, yeah.
But also maybe the distance gave a bit of safety.
Right. I was thinking these were one-on-one, but you're suggesting these were groups.
Oh, no, it's group. Yeah,
wow.
that's why it was so interesting.
Yeah.
Because
Wow.
they were listening to each other as much as I was listening to them.
That's very, very beautiful.
Yeah.
We make a lot of claims for poetry, and it's really the only genre like this. I mean, you don't find people talking about why we must have biographies, the importance of the play, but we're always making poetry defend itself for its existence. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but does poetry play some important role in reconciliation? I mean, is that too much to place on a genre?
Yeah, I wonder, is it too much? I think it has had an important role, and it does have an important role. I suppose there's something about the quietness of poetry that people can take and have with them. You know, I think a lot of Irish people have poems that they just love, and that they keep with them in their lives. And I think it can have I mean, I do think the work of Seamus Heaney has had a reconciling impact because he's loved across all communities. For example, you know, so yeah, I do think it can have that power. Yeah.
Do you know if Irish students still have to memorize poems in school?
Not generally, but there is a particular program which Seamus Heaney funded called Poetry Aloud, where schools all over Ireland, they learn poems off by heart and recite them.
Nice.
And I was at an event in the Abbey Theatre recently where it was for Seamus Heaney's anniversary, and I read a poem, but just before me, a young fellow of 19 read a poem that he had done in Poetry Aloud, that he had learned in Poetry Aloud, a Seamus Heaney poem.
Nice.
And he did it off by heart from, you know, the Abbey stage. Quite a feat.
That's great.
Yeah.
We have a program here. I think it's called Poetry Out Loud. Yeah.
All right. So it's
the winner. I only see the winners, but they're spectacular.
Yeah.
Just spectacular.
Yeah.
I wish it were more common in school. The function of empathy is everywhere in your poems, and particularly in these poems about the miners, the lead miners.
Yeah.
I didn't even know where lead came from until I read your poems and started to look into this. But it must be something like coal mining. I mean, horrible work, right? And poisonous.
And dangerous.
Yeah, dangerous and poisonous.
Yeah.
And you've got a series of poems about these lead miners. I wonder if you'd read one called "The Pay" on 27. And what I want you to listen to is the voice that this poem is written in.
The Pay. I'd like to tell you I felt no fear, but every hour under Camaraderie was an hour too close to rockfall, jackhammer pounding, dynamite roar. 7 feet high, 4 feet wide, the tunnel mapped the mineral seam. My brothers quit for better pay, digging drains in Camden, but the mountains wouldn't let me go. Frost an inch thick on my shovel. I filled wagons with granite and lead, muscled them out of the tunnel to tip into the crusher, the master who had to be fed. Now brambles reed the adits, moss smooths broken stone. I'm hard of hearing, half crippled, hands fissured as schist, and still my heart lifts to see morning mist veiling Tonlagee.
You don't often write in the first person in a male voice.
Yeah.
What was it like? Why did you do it?
Well, I sort of had to when I wanted to try and write about the miners.
But you could have written in the third person and done beautifully.
Yes, I suppose I really wanted to evoke this miner. I spoke to 2 miners who were in their 80s as part of the research for this.
They're still alive.
Yeah.
The mines are closed, I assume.
The mines are closed. The last mine closed in 1957. But the miners who I spoke to, the 2, they had worked there.
Wow.
So, and why the mine closed was there was an explosion
Yeah.
and a man was killed in it. And his cousin, who was beside him in the explosion, is the person who started all of these poems for me. Because he's well known in Wicklow, and people had told me he's just a marvelous man. And so I said, I wonder, could I meet him? And I went to meet Robbie and asked him questions, and that led to one poem. And then we put it into a documentary for Radio 4. So one led to another and another.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, and one of the poems, the one Pit Ponies of Glendassan, which is about working with the ponies in the mines,
Right.
I interviewed another miner. I went to his house and asked him all about it. And within a few months, he died.
So you got there just in time.
I got there just in time, yeah.
So he hadn't worked in these mines for 65 years.
Yeah.
And still had these clear memories.
Yeah. So, for example, Robbie, he was so young when this accident happened, and his cousin
He would have been a
died.
teenager.
He was only a teenager. He went into the mines without telling his mother. She didn't know because, of course, she didn't want him to be in the mines. He went in at 16 because it paid better than the forestry and working on a farm. So that's why they did it. So that's the idea of the pay.
Right.
But one of the things the miners all say is the camaraderie really mattered. They really cared about each other.
Right.
But it was dangerous. And that's, I suppose I was trying to, because the men said, they were frightened. And it was hard for them to admit that.
Right. They're tough guys. I assume. It's hard physical work.
Yeah. But they also said things like it was very peaceful in there. I know there's all kinds of paradoxes, but they said sometimes in the tunnel it felt very peaceful, because you were right in under the mountain. And they knew these mountains. They grew up in these mountains. They could cycle 20 miles to go to work and 20 miles home again.
Wow.
It was a really tough life. But it's really important to them that we remember.
I was going to say, I mean, you're reclaiming a history that's, I would assume, pretty much lost.
Yeah.
You're interviewing people that are nearing the end of their lives.
Yeah, there are people locally in Wicklow who are also doing this work.
Mm-hmm.
So it's because of the work they've done in reclaiming the history that I was able to do this research. Like, there's very good archived interviews with the miners.
Oh, good.
Who are now no longer alive, but there's really good archives of them. Yeah.
I wasn't going to have you read, but I love that pony poem. Can you read that?
I will. Yes. Pit Ponies of Glendassan. Hitched to an 8-hour shift in Britchens, Hames, and Traces, they follow the miners' carbide lights, halt under hoppers, turn on a threepence, and lean into their collars to pull the 5-wagon train. Low-set cobs from the Curragh, a piebald, and 2 greys. Their hooves fall heavy as hammers on granite. They haul lengths of larch for pit props, pneumatic drills, boxes of gelignite, and from time to time deliver injured men back to daylight. The miners pat their necks in passing and feed them windfall apples. Comrades in toil and first to halt, legs locked at a sudden rumbling, a change in the air, or the rush of running water.
That was the title poem. You don't write in rhyme, typically, as far as I know, but you rely heavily on alliteration.
Yes.
Can you talk about some of those lines and the alliteration, which makes the lines just sing?
Yeah, well, I suppose the sound is so important. It's so important in all my poems, but it's really important in this one. And you see, the vocabulary of the ponies and the mines conveys so much. The sound and hitched was a word I needed to start it with. Like, it didn't start with hitched originally, and then I put hitched is right, because then Britchens, Hames, and Traces, isn't there something? It's percussive,
right.
and I felt that the sounds captured a sense of what they were doing, you know. And then, of course, the ponies, their hooves on the granite, that sound. Really wanted to work with that. So the alliteration worked with that. All those H's, ha 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 sounds, you know. So yeah, that's what I was trying to do. And then it's kind of lucky when it happens, you know. You're listening out. I mean, you know, like say Britchen's Hames and Traces. Like he gave me that language. He gave me that vocabulary, you know. So I noted down things, and then I went home, and then you try and shape it into a poem, you know.
It's nice.
Yeah,
It's very nice. It's
Yeah.
beautiful. Speaking of the ponies, and it reminds me of all the animals in your poems, which are very beautiful. That we ran a poem in the Post today about a shepherd, and there's a dog in that poem. Is very touching. Your poetry takes us back to the physical world and the natural world in a way that I think a lot of us are alienated from. I mean, you live apparently in a very rural place, very
Yeah,
beautiful place, and you've sent me some photos that are lovely. But most of us, you know, we live in suburbs or we live in cities, and we don't see any animals besides dogs and cats and squirrels and rats, and not in that order. I wonder if you're conscious as you're writing to try and, you know, invoke the natural world in a way that feels lost.
Yeah. Well, you know, the whole thing about biodiversity loss is with me every single day.
Yes.
More and more and more, even in the time since I started writing.
You mean the crisis of
The
biodiversity?
crisis. It's with me every day. And so in this book in particular, I felt it was important to honor what we have and also to talk about restoration. It's kind of saying we can save, we can, it's not too late. I wanted to say that as well in the poems. Without preaching and without lecturing, you know, find a way of invoking. And I suppose I do think they're kind of love poems to the world,
definitely.
to nature.
I want you to read this poem, Recipe for a Bog, on 58, which really is. And I kept thinking she's alluding to an Emily Dickinson poem, and I went back and I looked through the poems and I couldn't find the right poem, but clearly you are invoking that spirit.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We'll just say that to make me feel better.
No, I love Emily Dickinson. Yeah. You know the one about the grass, to be a grass. You know, this one she has about just loving grass.
Yes.
I just love that poem.
Yes.
But anyway.
This is 58.
Recipe for a bog. Block the gullies and grips where the river rises. Slow the downhill flow of peat-filled streams. Fell spruce and pine that thirst for moisture, mulch parched earth with heather brash, graft sphagnum moss from a healthy bank, lay straw, feather light on fragments. Welcome rain, gaze at puddles spreading into ponds, count frogs, watch emperor moths in cotton grass, a spider trapped on sundew tendrils, dragonflies skittish from butterwort to asphodel, and a pair of low-flying merlin, wingbeat, glide.
That is a love poem.
Yes.
Yes. It's funny, I was preparing for this, the front of the Wall Street Journal was about these bogs where all this sphagnum moss is apparently is crucial to containing the carbon that is keeping the climate stable. And it's imperiled.
And bogs are 4 times more effective, or maybe more, than forests.
Yes.
So, you know, we criticize what's happening in the Amazon, but our bogs are crucial.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is based on the restoration work that's happening in County Wicklow. It's a neighbour of mine who walks 40 minutes uphill every day and 40 minutes back at the end of a day's hard work working, restoring bogs. Wow. So we went on the walk with them, you know, as part of my research. I went up with them, a very wet, mucky day.
Nice.
And what's important for me is that this poem is important to him.
Oh, nice.
And so Wicklow National Park put it out on,
lovely.
they made a video of
Yes.
it, and what he was saying is that ecologists need encouragement at the moment because so many of them are despairing.
Yeah.
And so he said the fact that, anybody in the arts is interested in what we're doing really matters.
Right. And it makes you see the bog in a way that I certainly didn't. I mean, the recipe
Yeah.
really does expand my sense of what's there.
Yeah.
You all need to stand up just for a moment. We're not done. Just stand up. Stretch your legs. Shake off the sleepiness. I insist. Okay, sit down. I'll have to talk to some of you afterwards. Several of the most moving poems here are about your mother, your parents.
Yeah.
Tell us about her. What did she think of your decision to? Did she live long enough to see you become a poet?
Yeah, Mom is still alive.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, Mom is 87.
Excellent.
My father died in 2017, but Mom is 88. She's 88.
And what did she think of this? I mean, it's relatively brief. You've been publishing for 8 years.
Yeah.
You're a pretty big success already. What does she think?
She's very proud.
Yeah, that.
Very proud. Yeah, and she's every time Mum has dementia, so she forgets, but every time I tell her about something good that's happened, she said, "I wish your father was here."
Oh,
yeah.
Nice.
that's always what she said. So I know when I tell her that that's what she said.
That's nice. In a poem called "Becoming," you write, "I am becoming mother to my mother, closer to mother than I have ever been." That closeness seems to be forged in an act of caring for her.
Yeah.
In a closeness that probably wasn't like the closeness when you were a teenager.
Yeah.
It's different.
Yeah.
Maybe even better.
Yeah.
It is. Would you read a poem called "After"?
Yes.
Maybe the first poem?
Yes, the first poem.
Page 10.
Yeah. After. Now that her heart is bent over like larkspur after a storm, she stays in bed past milking time, pulling the quilt tight around her shoulders until her collie barks her down the stairs to lift the back door latch. She kneels to light the kippings piled on last night's embers. Her bones creak like the bolt on the door of the barn. A cup of oats, 2 cups of water, a pinch of salt, porridge, tea, and tablets, a meal for a queen. Every day without him is too long. She's waiting with the tired cows at the gate.
We generally have such terrible attitudes about the elderly and caring for people. And I love the way your poems in this opening section just push back against that without sentimentality, but firmly, and say that there is a kind of beauty in age and in caring for people.
Yeah.
It's really, really lovely.
Thank you.
A poem called "Raspberries," just to keep along this.
Yes.
That's kind of holiness in caring for someone you love who's old.
Raspberries. Sunday morning stillness in a thicket of canes. My mother reaches for quilted berries, eases them red and willing from yellow stalks, ready to hull for the simmering. She tells me not to forget a pound of sugar for every pound of fruit. Says I must remember because something has slipped into her mind, and every night, like a stoat among voles, it hunts down her memories.
It's so beautiful, the tension in that poem between your mother losing her memory and this poem inscribing her memory.
Yeah.
It's really lovely.
Thank you.
And quilted fruit?
Yeah.
I mean, you could just stop there. Perfect. It's so striking to me that you end this beautiful section about your mother and grandmother with a poem that doesn't mention either of them.
Yeah.
That must have been deliberate. It's a poem called The Arch
Yes.
on page 22. And as you're arranging the poems, why did you choose that poem to end the section about your mother and grandmother?
Well, it's interesting because this one I actually wrote about my father when he was very ill.
Mhm.
And it was that sense of, you know, when you're with someone in their when they're dying, but you have a sense they're not ready to let go.
Mhm.
So that was really, it was evoked by my father, and yet it seemed to fit. It just seemed to fit because it's about endings and holding on, and about a life kind of well lived. I felt it's what it was about. I mean, it's an arch I saw in rural France one time, and it was standing without a wall. And I decided, it just was very evocative to
Yes.
me and reminded me of my father at the time. You know,
Wonderful.
yeah, the arch. The arch, not Tudor or Corbel, Lancet or Gothic, not burdened by a bridge or chastened by a church, but hewn from rough limestone blocks, wedged flank to flank by peasant masons. It stands at the end of the avenue in chestnut tree shade. It has sent off scoundrels, barred bailiffs from entry, welcomed carriages home. It never sleeps on duty, never refuses swallows a nest, never tells stories better unsaid. Years it watched the courtyard walls crumble and fall, till it was left alone. When will it stop trying to hold what can no longer be held?
It's a very powerful ending to this section.
Mm.
Bereft of any sentimentality,
Mm.
very physical, but not human,
Yeah,
but filled with human
yeah,
feeling.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
The final section of this collection is, I think, the most intimate and personal.
Yeah.
Could you read a poem called Her First
Yeah.
on page 66? And I won't say any more.
Okay. Her first.
It doesn't develop the way I expected it to.
Her first. The sun tries to shine through narrow frosted windows while we wait with the other births, deaths, and marriages. Close to lunchtime, the registrar ushers us into her office. Stacks of files on every surface look set to topple. She murmurs, "You're my first," and reads out the regulations, then shuffles through papers, studies the stapler on her desk, and reads them again. When we tell her we've been together 20 years, she stops searching for a biro, meets our eyes and smiles. It'll be a beautiful day.
That is so lovely for you to take a moment like that, which was really important to you and Isabel.
Yeah.
I mean, you're getting married, and to turn it and make it about this stranger, this woman, this bureaucrat is a very giving, loving act.
Yeah.
Ireland legalized gay marriage like in the teens, 2015?
This was 2011, actually, because it was civil partnership first.
Oh, okay.
We got civil partnership.
Right.
And so we were the first couple in Wicklow, in County Wicklow.
Oh, you weren't just her first, you were the first.
We were the first couple in that county. So
Wow.
she had never, you know, she was the registrar,
Right.
and she really was a bit lost, you know. And I mean, actually, the thing is, I mean, I actually started to cry out there,
Sure.
and you know,
I was a mess at my wedding.
You know, but then when she realized, you could just see a change, and that's what I wanted to. I wanted to pay tribute to her, because this was the day we just went to register, because then she actually did the marriage, you know, the civil
Nice.
partnership. But this was the very first time.
Right. Very nice. In
Yeah.
a poem called Wife, you write, "Strange to use this word for the woman I love." Strange how?
Well, I never wanted to have either a husband or a wife. You know, I'm a feminist in my 20s and 30s, and I just never envisaged. And the wife in particular, you know, a chattel and, all the stuff that went along with wife.
Yes.
So I couldn't. So, but it was younger lesbian couples who helped me use the language. I heard, because young people in Ireland, they're not a bit, daunted by that,
right.
because, I was an old one getting married, so it did feel uncomfortable. It felt uncomfortable, for political reasons as well.
So there you were, breaking barriers.
Yeah.
But it was the younger generation that made you more comfortable with the language of it.
Absolutely.
That's weird. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah, there's a lesbian, a wonderful poet in my writing workshop. And, she was talking about her wife, and I'm listening to her and thinking, you say that so easily.
And it was just the language issue. It wasn't any sort of self-consciousness about being gay.
No, it was the language.
Interesting.
How do I use this language about the person I love? Because wife felt formal, felt more distant than, but it was always hard to get the right, because partner wasn't right, companion wasn't right. It's always hard to get the right word for something so important.
And hard to write about in a poem, I would think. I mean, to be out is one thing, but to write a poem about it is something else. What was that process like, and how long did it take you to write frankly and openly about your relationship in poetry?
Yeah, every collection there's more. And I mean, just to say, civil partnership and marriage equality made a big difference to my creativity. I have no doubt about it. And I feel it's important to say that, because people think it's something legal, but it's much more deeper than something legal. It's all about being able to be who you are as openly as possible. And I mean, isn't that what poetry, is all about? Naming things and honoring. And so I think it's no coincidence that in this collection I'm able to be much freer.
Fascinating. And your books track those changes in the law.
Yeah, they do, actually. I gave a reading at a queer poetry event in Dublin recently, and I just chose out those poems from the 3 books. Mm-hmm. And it was like telling the whole story of a gradual, coming to where we are now in Ireland.
Right. But the changes in the law, the changes in the culture, make you feel
freer.
On the page and in life.
Yeah, and in life.
Makes sense, of course.
Yeah, and more equal.
Right.
It really matters. And I suppose I feel it's really important. It matters to creativity. It matters to all kinds of things. But it matters to how you can express yourself and how you can play. Because you can imagine, creativity is all about being playful. Right. And if there's a part of yourself you feel you have to hide, of course that affects. Right. So
we can't read this poem in Florida, though.
There's the politics.
And I'm not entirely kidding.
Yes, no, I know. Yeah.
We can edit that part out. In a poem called Spalls, which is another word I'd never heard before, I'm sure. You write that your parents would have preferred the drive from Galway to Mayo. Yeah. They would have preferred a husband and children too. But they didn't sound like bad parents. They didn't sound like people that wouldn't accept you at all. I love the way this poem catches something very subtle in your relationship with your parents and their acceptance of you. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, this is the last poem that got into the book. Oh. I had it finished. The book was finished, and I had to write to Neil Astley, my editor, to say, could I get another one in?
It's lovely, very lovely.
But yeah, I suppose that is, I feel the poem is about mutual acceptance and about acceptance across differences. Yes. That it doesn't all have to be sorted, and it doesn't all have to be fine, and you can still love someone.
Exactly.
That's what I was trying to get across there. Okay.
Now listen to this poem in the context of what you just said. This is on page 65.
And just to say, spalls are the little stones that hold a dry stone wall together. Spalls. To help us grow a garden, my mother and father travelled across the Bog of Allen and over the Wicklow Gap. They'd have preferred to drive west to Galway or Mayo. They'd have preferred a husband and children. But their daughter loved a woman. We'd have the table set for breakfast, rashers, black pudding, fried bread and eggs. When the soil had warmed, we unloaded shovels and rakes, buckets of compost and the rusted iron bar for prizing out rocks. The back seat was thronged with pots of seedlings my mother had nurtured all winter. We worked to her bidding, loosen tangle roots before planting, sow marigolds next to beans, sprinkle Epsom salts around roses. My father took off on his own to spud ragwort or clip a hedge. One day, he spent hours gathering stones of different shapes and sizes. By evening, he'd built us a wall under the holly, held together by gravity and friction, hearted with handfuls of spalls.
That is one of the most beautiful descriptions I've heard for the way a real loving family works.
Yeah.
Something held together by gravity and friction, hearted with handfuls of spalls. And that's the way families are, right?
Yeah.
Real families.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
It's just perfect. Let's end with a poem that captures for me the way your poetry makes me feel. It's a poem called Stepping In on 73.
Oh, great. Yeah. It's lovely to read this one. Stepping in. Rain stipples the river as you huddle for shelter, balancing on one foot to undress, then clamber over the fence for the down the bank scramble through cattails and hazel. Bone cold awakening of skin. You ask yourself why, though your body remembers in every cell. Lemon mossed pebbles, damselflies glancing on brooklime and alder, scent of the bog from above Glendassan, and the current that takes you, alert, electric, alive.
That is it, isn't it? Alert, electric, alive. It's just perfect. Thank you so much for talking with us tonight. This is such a pleasure. Love that. You're a beautiful reader of your work.
Top artists performing at the top of their game for Jane and Ron. So Ron, for your close reading of Jane's poems and for your empathic insights and observations about her poems and for your thoughtful questions about her poems and so giving us a new window into her poems. Thank you very much, Ron. And Jane, for your flat, broad Roscommon accent, bringing your poems to life and jumping them off the page. Thank you very much. And for the context you provided for your poems. Thank you very much. And for you, the audience, here and at home and online, for your attention and for your engagement and for being here, thank you. I have something for Ron. When Ron interviewed Jane the last time, 2000, I kind of unofficially, without consulting with the embassy, made him an honorary Irishman. Now I'm taking the honorary off it. He kind of is an Irishman. But I brought from Ron, we have an old potter in Castleconnell, the little village I grew up in. He's very old now, he stopped making pottery. But he adorned his pottery with Celtic mythological symbols. So I have here for Ron a small bit of pottery from Richard Ferris. And the Celtic symbols on the pottery mean really birth, life, and death exemplifying not the end, but just a new beginning. So Ron, as Jane put it, for your presence and for your attention, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This is much more than I deserve. Thank you.
I'm going to hand over to Kate Meenan-Waugh in a minute, but I would just say this. Holiday time is coming, lads. The age-old question, what do I get for a gift? The most meaningful gift we can give now is a book for so many reasons. A book of Irish poetry, and coincidence of coincidences, we have Jane's poetry book upstairs, $15 a shot, splurge. You've earned it. Thank you so much. I hand you over to Chair of the Board of Solas Nua, Kate Meenan-Waugh.
Thank you so much, everyone. And a special thank you to Patty Meskel, for really helping this evening be realized. Thank you to NYU, to Tom and his crew. Thank you to our board members who are here. And I want to thank the poets, because I know there are other poets in the room. And the poets, they help us make sense of our interior and exterior world. And we just can't get enough of it. For those of you, if this is your first Solas Nua event, this is who we are. This is what we do. And we welcome you. We welcome you to the Solas Nua family. We do have 4 different book groups that our board member Dennis Houlihan oversees. The next poetry book group is October 16th. These are Zoom online poetry groups. We also have a fiction, nonfiction, and a group that focuses on the classics, I think, right? Classic Irish literature. So if literature is your thing, or if it's just something you're exploring, we have it for you, and we have access and we have paths by which you can reach it, okay? And just my last thing I have to do as part of my duty as board chair. So much of what we do and bring to our audiences is without cost to you direct. But of course, we do have donors. Many of you are here in the room, and we thank you for that. We have institutional donors. We have government donors. It's what makes the magic happen. So I, look back to what Patty said, year end, a lot of people thinking about what experiences did I have this year that really touched me. And if you've been touched by Solas Nua this year, be generous by the end of the year, okay? Thank you so very much. I think we're gonna go back upstairs. Those of you who have purchased books, I know that Jane's gonna be very happy to sign them. Thank you, Ron Clarke, again. Agree with Patty, a masterful moderation of Jane's readings. So again, thank you so much. Looking forward to seeing you at the next event. Bye-bye.
Wish.